Hi, my name's Willing Phillips. I've changed my name to Willing in the last couple of years. I have been a strategic organizational consultant from the likes of Bank America and American Airlines and several Smithsonian museums, down to very small local museums and businesses that do $1 million to $5 million of revenue a year. Probably been exposed to 1,000, maybe it's more, executive teams, and I've spoken to 400 or 500 executive peer groups through Vistage and YPO. I've had a lot of exposure to the executive position, and one of the challenges that people usually recognize is, how do I take my ideas and bring them into my management team and get them fired up and committed to carrying them out. And for some people, I think early on in their leading career, they believe that accountability is the way to do it. In other words, I will watch you, I will check up on you, I will measure you to see if you're doing it right. And then I'll reward or punish you to keep you on track. So this is probably the most primitive system of getting people to do things. It is one of the least effective ways of really tapping someone's best brain, best heart, or motivation, is to threaten them or simply reward them with things out here, as opposed to the greatest reward in all work is that it is meaningful and that people have a certain amount of autonomy over the work they're doing. And so that by driving a hard accountability in, you lose the autonomy. And so you're already demotivating and undermining commitment. You may get something done by the numbers, but that may work for a few people. But when you're, the larger the organization you're managing, the more difficult this becomes. So I want to tell you about Ricardo Salinas. Much of my consulting was done through the Adizes Institute, a boutique strategic consulting firm that worked all over the world. One of our clients was Ricardo Salinas, the founder and president of Grupo Salinas in Mexico. Let me tell you what he presided over. He didn't preside over just one executive team. He had executive teams in one of the largest retail chains, Electra, that's all over Latin America, 2 cell phone companies, 2 television networks, a bank, an insurance company, a pension fund. He had about 60,000 employees. He had executive teams all over the place. And yet he ended up, by the results, of making exceptionally good decisions with very high degrees of a commitment. So the question, our firm worked with Ricardo Salinas for about a little over a decade. And the head of our firm, Ichak Adizes, once asked him, how do you do this? How do you end up making such good, not just okay, but good, sometimes brilliant decisions in so many different businesses? How can you know so much, do that? And he explained, it's very simple. He said, I hire very good people who know a great deal about their business. And the people who know about banking know almost nothing about television or cell phones, and vice versa. But within that particular business, we've got a half dozen, maybe a dozen people who are quite smart about the business and quite concerned about how we market the business and how we manage our money so it's profitable, and how we manage our people so that they can deliver. He said, the way I do it is this. I go into a meeting of one of my many divisions, and I know we have to make an important decision. That's on the agenda. And so when I walk into the meeting, I come in with my kid gloves. These are very soft. They feel wonderful. They're very nice. Wonderful. They're so aesthetically pleasing. You might even want to wear them in the summertime. They're very soft. What that means in the meeting is that once the topic is on the table, I start asking questions. I ask them in a soft voice. I ask them in a welcoming voice. I ask them with curiosity. And I ask them in a tone of voice and a body language that is very respectful of what that person knows. And I call on people. I say, Alfredo, we haven't heard from you about the different options here. And from the past, I know that you have lots of good perspectives on issues like this from the financial point of view. I'd love to hear from you. As Alfredo talks, he listens. He might even jot down a note or two, but he listens. He does not interrupt. He doesn't allow others to interrupt, even if they disagree. And he never says anything that is undermining or defensive, whether he agrees or not. He says, that's not the point for me to express agreement or disagreement or critique or training or coaching while I'm trying to get information. I've got on my kid gloves. I want to handle each mind in that room with as much care as possible so that they feel safe, so that I build an atmosphere of trust, so that they know I care for them and how they think and the work they've done and their family and their department. I need that trust because that trust and safety becomes the pipeline by which they reveal their thoughts. And on a little side note here, the revealing of thoughts is a little bit like what happens when you buy an old house and you're going to fix it up a little bit. And you move in and you are sitting in the living room surveying it, and you sit in the windowsill and crack! I say, oh, I've got to fix that windowsill. So next weekend you come home and you take out the windowsill and you're thinking of putting in a new one, and they say, ooh, the window frame has a few problems here. And so then you take out the window frame. And then, oh, the wall. And before you know it, you're replacing a good portion of the side of the house. Anybody who's done home repair knows this happens, whether it's electrical, plumbing, carpentry. The same thing is in revealing your mind. If it's not a very safe place, I will give you the very top of my mind. I will give you standard information that's safe. If you accept that, and I feel that it's safe here, I may try a slice of information a little bit deeper. And I will work my way down, just like in the old house. As I take off the top layers, other layers expose themselves. And as we talk and dialogue about these among ourselves, other layers are revealed. So in the meeting, Ricardo wants to use these kid gloves to get all the information out. No rush. Take your time. Think about it. At some point, and maybe this is Ricardo's greatest skill, he notices one or two things. The easy one is, it sounds like we're repeating ourselves. I just hear you saying the same things over and over again. I need new information. That's a signal. The second is, he may simply feel, I think we've covered about 80% of the information we need here, and we're not going to wait around for all the research to get us 100% of the information, which we would never get anyway, and it might take us another 6 months. But I think we've got enough information for me to make a decision. So now what he does is he reaches over and he takes off his kid gloves, and he reaches over and he looks to find one of his other gloves. This is his other glove. And he comes in and he says, gentlemen, ladies, I've got enough information. I think we can make a decision. I want to give you a draft. Notice that word draft decision. And we will then come back and check it out and see how it works. Takes off that glove. And he says, here's my draft decision about how we're going to handle XYZ under QXR circumstances. And we'll need to do this and that, and we'll need that and this. And so that's the decision. Then he does something very interestingly. He puts back on the kid gloves, and he says to everyone, I would now like to find out if you have any questions about that draft decision. And he goes through the QDDA, questions, doubts, disagreements, additions. Each one of those is going a little bit deeper into what might potentially change that draft decision. A question is just, will we start on Thursday or a Friday? A doubt is, I think we're starting way too soon. So we're getting a little riskier and it needs to be a little safer. So we approach the accommodating of the draft decision in this 4-part sequence. Questions, when they're answered, doubts, when they're answered, disagreements. And you'll find, of course, that many disagreements and doubts will be framed as questions, so they're safer. But when they can be framed as a question or a disagreement, they're clearer. And then lastly, we ask for additions. So Ricardo takes all those. Thank you very much. He pulls them together and he says, I now have a revised draft decision. Let me read it to you. And he goes through and states it. And then he goes around the room and he asks each person anything more, meaning any questions, doubts, disagreements, or additions. Anything more. And the person can either say yes and give their question, doubt, disagreement, or addition, or they can say pass. And it might go pass around the room until one person says, I got something on my mind that's a little hard to frame. Maybe some other people can help me. Let me give a first stab at it. So Ricardo puts on the glove and says, please. And as he starts to formulate a concern, an accommodation, he asks other people to help him put words onto it. Ricardo has the gloves on, so he's not interrupting, he's not defending, he's not discounting, he's listening. If items come up, we go back to this. Questions, doubts, disagreements, additions, let's discuss them, let's talk about them. And while this is on, these are on in his mind. This means that Ricardo has switched off his authoritarian, I'm the boss, I'm the founder mind, to I'm the learner, I'm curious, let it come in. Let me absorb that perspective and new information, even when it's uncomfortable, even when I may not agree with it. So that process is done until we can go all the way around the room. Pass. One of the things we practiced in our consulting firm, because when we were meeting with clients, we were making very major decisions about strategy, structure, systems, and we wanted to make sure there was commitment, because we're back to those 2 rules of commitment discussed in another videotape. So we would ask for 3 clear passes. All the way around once. One more time. This is the last chance you have to get something on the table that might be of concern to you. Otherwise, I'm going to expect that this decision will be your decision. So look inside yourself. Is there anything that would constrain your complete and total commitment to this decision? If so, let's talk. On the 3rd clear pass, the last person says, yeah, I have something. Often that's when the most important question finally gets asked. The process of 3 clear passes is a process for building reflection, tension, and opportunity. So Ricardo ensures through the velvet glove approach that we go deep down and get all the questions, doubts, disagreements, and additions, and we discuss them. And we give people a chance to discuss their point of view. He then comes to a point and he rereads any adjustments, fine-tunings, and it usually turns out that the fine-tunings and adjustments are rather minor, often significant, but not minor in the thrust of the decision. But the fact that it could be put in place a month later instead of a month earlier gets total commitment from the accounting department, because they're busy making a huge transfer to a new piece of software that's just about finished. And if you can wait a month, we'll be happy. So by delaying the decision a month, you build their commitment. That's the approach. So once the finalized, what we're doing now is finalizing the decision. We're getting all the accommodations done to all the drafts. And as that's happening, Ricardo is setting aside his velvet gloves, and he's coming up with his steel gloves. And he says, now that you are all committed, I'm going to ask you to go around the room and say, I agree. Each person, I agree, I agree, I agree. It's about as close as you can get to something like King Arthur having all his knights at the round table swearing allegiance. That's what he's asking. But he's given them time to put in their ideas and to capture their hearts and their minds by listening with velvet gloves. When everyone says, I agree, I agree, I agree, he says, I will now hold you accountable for implementing these. And I will manage going forward with steel gloves because you're committed to this. The beauty of Ricardo Salinas' approach is that he is able to mix democracy with dictatorship in the right proportions. The democracy comes in the beginning where he gets input from everyone, which is so precious, so you don't make a dumb decision. And once we've got commitment, he then operates like a dictator and holds people accountable, including himself, and drives for that. This decision-making process that mixes two different ways solves some of the problems we have with our traditional decision-making tools. Voting, whether it's a simple majority or whether it's a supermajority, always creates a minority who didn't win. And often in that voting process, because people want to win, the focus is more on showing how the other person's view is wrong than in understanding anything. And the result is that the voting process will tend to polarize. And now the majority wins, and what we have over here are what you might call terrorists. Some are active, some are passive. Passive terrorists accept the decision because you're the boss. I work here, and I'll do what you say. And I'll do it as fast as I can. And I probably won't put in too much overtime. And if the new decision runs off the rails, I'll just sit there and point and say, I knew that was going to happen. I told you so, but you didn't listen. That's kind of a quiet terrorist. There are various kinds of strikes where people decide to do everything in the business exactly according to policy, which makes everything take about twice as long. Lots of ways to communicate back that you're not committed to the decision. That's the problem with voting, always. Now, sometimes a straw vote can be useful to find out what do we need to discuss. So how many people are yes, how many people are nay? Okay, we're all agreed on this, so why waste time on it? On the other hand, you might find two people who are not in agreement. This is a good time to have a discussion, not a vote. Now, the other extreme or approach to decision making is called consensus. This means everybody is in complete agreement. This has been widely used in the Quaker faith. I once knew a woman who was quite active in the consulting world, who was also active in several international Quaker committees. And I talked to her about consensus, and she said it really forces you to respect and pay attention to a single person, which is, it's an interesting value to have. She said, sometimes we spend a lot of time trying to understand what that person is saying and figure out how to build it in or accommodate it into the larger decision. And she said, I remember once when one person did not agree and we had a very significant decision, and he never came into agreement. And finally, after 20 years, we could make the decision. I said, what'd you do? I thought there was some really cool process. And she said, he died. Most organizations are unwilling to wait 20 years to make an important decision. And the commitment to consensus does that. The commitment to voting violates commitment. Democracy, bringing these two together, solves problems on both sides. So thanks to Ricardo Salinas, who has really sharpened up this idea. Do your best.